Hey guys, welcome to Peter Stories. Before we start these amazing stories, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. And tell me, where are you watching from? I want to know. Ben Richards pulled his truck into the Olympic National Park Ranger Station parking lot at 6:47 a.m., 3 minutes earlier than usual. The October air carried that sharp bite that meant winter wasn't far behind, and the Douglas firs were already starting to shed their lower branches in preparation. He'd been coming to this same spot for 8 years, 5 as an active ranger, 3 as a freelance search and rescue consultant. The routine never changed. Coffee from the thermos, check the weather report, review the case file, gear up. Today's case was straightforward on paper. Marcus Chen, 34, experienced hiker from Seattle. Last seen on the Hoh River Trail yesterday afternoon by a family of 4 around 2 p.m. When he didn't return to his campsite by nightfall, his girlfriend called it in. Standard missing person protocol had been initiated, but the overnight search team had found nothing except his tent, still properly set up, with all his gear inside. Ben spread the topographical map across his hood and traced the trail with his finger. The Hoh River Trail was popular but not dangerous, a well-maintained path that followed the river for 18 miles into the heart of the temperate rainforest. Chen had registered for a day hike to 5 Mile Island, a moderate 6-hour round trip. Experienced hikers didn't just vanish on trails like that. He loaded his pack with the usual gear: GPS unit, compass, first aid kit, emergency shelter, water purification tablets, flares, rope. The radio crackled to life as he clipped it to his vest. "Ben, you copy?" Sarah's voice came through clear. She was the current head ranger, had taken over when Ben left the service 3 years ago. "Copy, Sarah. Heading out to Chen's last known. Weather's supposed to turn around noon. You've got maybe 5 hours of good light after that." Ben glanced at his watch. 7:15 a.m. "Roger, I'll check in every 2 hours." The trailhead was empty except for Chen's Honda Civic, still parked where his girlfriend said it would be. Ben walked a slow circle around the vehicle, taking in details. No signs of forced entry. Keys weren't visible inside. The car was backed into the parking space, the way someone parks when they want a quick exit. Chen had been thinking ahead. The trail started easy, a packed dirt path wide enough for 2 people. Ben had walked this route dozens of times, knew every turn and landmark, but today he moved slower than usual, letting his eyes sweep the ground in a pattern he'd perfected over the years. Most people saw a forest trail as a simple path from point A to point B. Ben saw it as a constantly changing manuscript written by every creature that passed through. 20 minutes in, he found the first sign. A partial boot print in a soft patch of earth about 50 yards past the mile marker. Size 11, modern hiking boot with an aggressive tread pattern. Ben knelt beside it, studying the depth and angle. The print was clear, recent, definitely from yesterday afternoon, based on how the edges had held their shape overnight. But something was wrong with it. Ben pulled out his camera and took several shots from different angles, then stood and looked around. The print was positioned perfectly in the center of the trail, as if Chen had stopped and deliberately planted his foot. Most people didn't walk like that. When you're hiking, your feet land naturally, slightly off-center in a rhythm that follows the terrain. This print was too precise, too intentional. He marked the GPS coordinates and continued north. The trail began to climb gradually, following the Hoh River as it wound deeper into the moss-draped forest. Ancient Sitka spruces towered overhead, some over 300 feet tall and 600 years old. Ben had always found comfort in these giants. They'd witnessed the passing of countless generations, held secrets in their rings that stretched back to before European settlement. But today, the forest felt different. The usual morning chorus of birds was absent. Ben stopped and listened carefully. No juncos, no wrens, no woodpeckers, even the Douglas squirrels were quiet. In 15 years of forest work, he'd learned that nature had a rhythm, and when that rhythm broke, it meant something was disturbing the ecosystem. At the 2-mile marker, he found the second anomaly, a broken branch, about 8 feet up on a young hemlock, the break fresh and clean. Ben studied it from multiple angles. The branch was too high for a passing hiker to have broken accidentally, and too thick to have snapped in yesterday's mild wind. Someone had deliberately reached up and snapped it off. He climbed a nearby fallen log to get a closer look. The break showed no weathering, and sap was still visible on the exposed wood. Definitely from yesterday. But why would Chen stop to break a branch 8 feet above the trail? Ben took more photos and continued hiking, but his senses were now fully engaged. This wasn't adding up to a simple lost hiker case. At 9:30 a.m., he reached the spot where the family had last seen Chen. 5 Mile Island was visible through the trees, a small rise of land in the middle of the Ho River, accessible by a fallen log that served as a natural bridge. Ben crossed carefully and spent 20 minutes examining the island. No signs that Chen had been here. No footprints in the soft earth near the riverbank. No broken vegetation. No traces of someone stopping for lunch or photos. Yet the family had been certain they'd seen him heading in this direction. Ben recrossed the log bridge and expanded his search pattern, moving in increasingly wide circles around the trail. That's when his exceptional tracking ability kicked into high gear. The skill that had made him legendary among the Ranger Service and earned him contracts with law enforcement agencies across the Pacific Northwest. Most people could follow obvious footprints. Ben could read stories in disturbed soil that others couldn't even see. 30 yards west of the trail, partially hidden under a fallen branch, he found what he was looking for. Another boot print, this one heading away from the trail at a 90-degree angle. The depth and stride pattern indicated someone moving quickly, purposefully, not the gait of someone who was lost or panicking. Ben followed the track carefully. Every few yards, he found another sign, a scuff mark on a moss-covered rock, a bent fern frond, a small stone kicked out of place. The trail led northwest, away from any established path into terrain that would be difficult for an inexperienced hiker to navigate. But Chen wasn't inexperienced. His girlfriend had said he'd been hiking for over 10 years, had done sections of the Pacific Crest Trail. He would know not to leave an established trail without good reason, unless someone had given him a reason. The tracks led to a steep ravine about a quarter-mile from the main trail. Ben approached the edge carefully and looked down. 20 feet below, the ravine floor was thick with fallen logs and dense undergrowth. It would be a challenging climb down and nearly impossible to climb back up without rope. He was about to start looking for a safer descent route when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. At the bottom of the ravine, partially hidden under a large fallen cedar, was a flash of bright blue fabric. Ben keyed his radio. "Sarah, this is Ben. I need you to patch me through to County Sheriff immediately." "Copy, Ben. What's your status?" "I found something. GPS coordinates follow." He read off the numbers. "Request immediate backup and a recovery team. This just became a potential crime scene." While he waited for the sheriff's response, Ben studied the ravine more carefully. His nature-reading ability, the skill that had saved his life more than once during his ranger years, was telling him that something was fundamentally wrong with this entire scene. The forest around the ravine was too quiet, not just the absence of bird calls, but a deeper silence that suggested even the insects had fled. The air smelled wrong too, a faint chemical odor that didn't belong in the natural pine and moss scents of the Olympic rainforest. And then he felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Ben had experienced this feeling dozens of times during his career. Bears, cougars, and even other humans produce distinct signatures when they focus their attention on you. This felt human, but not quite right. Too focused, too intense, like being studied rather than simply observed. He turned slowly, scanning the forest behind him. Nothing visible, But the feeling persisted. Someone was out there, close enough to see him clearly. "Ben, County Sheriff on Channel 7. Sarah's voice crackled through the radio. Ben switched channels. "This is Richards. I've got a possible body in a ravine about quarter-mile northwest of the 5 Mile Island trail marker, requesting immediate response." "Copy, Richards. Sheriff Martinez here. Can you confirm status of the individual?" Ben looked down at the blue fabric again. From this angle, he could make out what looked like the edge of a backpack. "Negative visual confirmation. I'm not going down there until you arrive, but this doesn't look like an accidental fall." "Understood. ETA 45 minutes. Do not disturb the scene." "Roger." Ben clipped the radio back to his vest and settled in to wait. But the feeling of being watched had intensified. Now it felt like whoever was out there was close enough to hear his radio conversations. He decided to test the theory. "Sarah, this is Ben," he said into the radio, speaking louder than necessary. "Go ahead, Ben. I'm going to circle around to the north side of this ravine to see if I can get a better view. If you don't hear from me in 30 minutes, send backup to these coordinates." It was a lie. Ben had no intention of moving from his current position. But if someone was listening, they would now expect him to head north. Instead, Ben moved south, using a technique he'd learned during his early ranger training. He stayed low and moved from tree to tree, pausing frequently to listen and observe. His natural orientation ability allowed him to navigate without constantly checking his compass, keeping his attention focused on detecting any human presence in the area. After 10 minutes of careful movement, he found what he was looking for: a hide. Someone had constructed a carefully camouflaged observation post about 60 yards southeast of the ravine, positioned to provide a clear view of the main trail and Ben's current location. The construction was professional, a low shelter made from local materials that would be invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. Ben approached from behind, moving with the silent bew method he'd learned from an old-timer ranger who'd served in Vietnam. When he was close enough to see inside the hide, his investigative intuition kicked in, the ability to synthesize disparate clues into patterns that others couldn't see. The hide was empty, but recently occupied. The ground showed the impression of someone lying prone for an extended period. A small area had been cleared for equipment, binoculars, by the look of the marks in the dirt. And there was something else. A single cigarette butt, hand-rolled, still smelling of tobacco. Whoever had been here had left less than an hour ago. Ben photographed everything without disturbing the scene, then retreated to his original position by the ravine. His radio crackled. "Ben, this is Sarah. Sheriff's ETA is now 20 minutes. You holding position?" "Affirmative. But Sarah, we need to treat this as an active crime scene with a potential suspect still in the area. The sheriff should approach with caution." "Copy. I'll relay that information." Ben settled behind a large Douglas fir and waited, but his mind was racing. The hide, the positioned observation post, the careful timing. This wasn't a random crime of opportunity. Someone had planned this, had known Chen would be on this trail. But how? He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his notes from the initial case briefing. Chen had registered for the day hike 2 days ago, had posted about his plans on social media, had told several friends about his route. Any number of people could have known where he'd be. The radio crackled again, but this time the voice was unfamiliar. Ben Richards. Ben froze. Someone was broadcasting on the sheriff's frequency, someone who knew his name. "Who is this?" Ben responded. "Someone who's been looking forward to meeting you. I've been watching you work this morning. Quite impressive. The hide was a nice touch. Most people would have missed it entirely." Ben's human presence detection ability was now screaming alerts. Whoever this was, they were close. Very close. "Where's Marcus Chen?" Ben asked. "Safe. For now." But I'm much more interested in you, Ben. Did you know that you have quite a reputation? 5 years with the National Park Service, specialization in search and rescue, 97% success rate in finding missing persons. That's remarkable. The voice was calm, educated, with a slight accent that Ben couldn't place. This person was enjoying the conversation. "What do you want?" Ben asked. "I want to play a game. You see, Ben, I've spent considerable time studying human behavior, and I've become fascinated by the concept of natural talent versus learned intelligence. You represent something quite rare, someone whose instinctive abilities have been honed to an extraordinary degree." Ben was slowly moving while talking, using trees and undergrowth as cover. His natural orientation ability was guiding him in a wide circle, trying to triangulate the source of the radio transmission. "And what do you represent?" Ben asked. "I represent the opposite, pure intellect, calculated methodology. I know exactly how you think, Ben, because I've studied people like you. I know that right now you're trying to locate me by moving in a search pattern. I know that you've already catalogued 17 different escape routes from your current position. I know that you're wondering whether Marcus Chen is still alive." Ben stopped moving. This person wasn't just educated. They were demonstrating specific knowledge of tactical behavior and psychological profiling. "Who are you?" Ben asked. "Someone who used to help people like you solve cases like this. Dr. William Carver, formerly of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. Perhaps you've heard of me?" Ben had heard the name. Dr. William Carver had been a legend in forensic psychology, had helped solve dozens of high-profile cases involving serial offenders. He disappeared from public view about 2 years ago after some kind of personal tragedy. "What happened to you, Carver?" Ben asked. "I learned that human behavior isn't as predictable as I thought, that sometimes the most intelligent person in the room can't prevent the worst possible outcome. Would you like to know about my family, Ben?" Ben didn't respond, but Carver continued anyway. "My wife and daughter. Brilliant people, both of them. They were driving home from my daughter's violin recital on a rainy night in November. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit them head-on, both killed instantly." "I'm sorry," Ben said, and meant it. "But here's the interesting part, Ben. 3 days before the accident, I had profiled that exact same drunk driver for a domestic violence case. I had recommended increased monitoring, had filed a report stating that he was a high-risk individual likely to escalate his dangerous behavior. And yet, somehow, the system failed. He was on the street in his car, drunk, at exactly the wrong moment to destroy everything I cared about." Ben was still moving, but more carefully now. Carver's voice was getting stronger on the radio, which meant Ben was moving in the right direction. "That must have been devastating," Ben said. "It was educational. It taught me that intelligence alone isn't enough. That pure analytical thinking has limitations that can't be overcome through study or experience. But natural instinct, the kind you possess, that's something different entirely, that's what I want to test." "Test how?" "Marcus Chen is alive, but his situation is time sensitive. You have until sunset to find him. That gives you approximately 6 hours. I've created a trail of clues that will challenge every one of your famous abilities. If you succeed, he lives. If you fail, and if I just call in backup," Ben asked, "then Marcus dies immediately and I disappear. I've spent 2 years planning this, Ben. I know exactly how law enforcement will respond, and I've prepared for every contingency except one: you, working alone, using abilities that can't be trained or replicated." Ben could see movement now, about 50 yards ahead through the trees. A figure in dark clothing, partially concealed behind a large cedar. "This is insane, Carver. Even if you've lost your family, this isn't the answer. Isn't it, Ben? I've spent my entire career studying the human mind, and I've concluded that true understanding only comes through direct experimentation. You represent a type of human adaptation that I've never been able to analyze in controlled conditions. I'm not your lab rat. No, you're much more than that. You're my equal, someone whose natural gifts match my acquired knowledge. This isn't about Marcus Chen anymore. It's about answering a fundamental question about human capability. Ben was close enough now to make out details. Carver was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing professional outdoor gear. He had salt and pepper hair and the kind of posture that suggested military or law enforcement training. "What question?" Ben asked. "Whether instinct can overcome perfect planning. Whether natural talent can defeat superior intelligence. Whether you, Ben Richards, are truly as exceptional as your reputation suggests." Carver stepped out from behind the tree, and Ben got his first clear look at the man who had orchestrated Marcus Chen's disappearance. He was holding a radio in one hand and what looked like a tablet computer in the other. "The game begins now," Carver said. "Your first clue is already waiting for you." Without warning, Carver tossed something small and metallic toward Ben, then turned and disappeared into the forest with a speed that suggested extensive familiarity with the terrain. Ben retrieved the object, a small brass compass, antique-looking, with an inscription on the back. "True north isn't always magnetic north. WC." His radio crackled again. "Ben, the compass is your first test. Use your natural orientation ability to find true north, then follow it for exactly 847 steps. You'll find your next clue there." Ben looked at the compass. The needle was pointing northwest, but something felt wrong about it. He held it at different angles, tapped the glass, but the needle remained steady. Then he closed his eyes and used his natural orientation ability, the same skill that had guided him through countless searches in fog, darkness, and unfamiliar terrain. The compass was wrong. True north was about 15 degrees east of where the needle pointed. "Clever," Ben muttered. Carver had given him a compass with a magnetic deviation, testing whether Ben would trust the instrument or his natural ability. Ben ignored the compass and began walking true north, counting his steps. Around him, the Olympic rainforest stretched in all directions, a maze of moss-covered logs, towering trees, and dense undergrowth. Without established trails, navigation became exponentially more difficult. But Ben moved with confidence, his internal compass guiding him through terrain that would have confused most people within minutes. At step 847, he found a small clearing where someone had arranged stones to form an arrow pointing east. Beside the arrow was another object, a glass vial containing what looked like water, with a note attached. Ben read the note. "The river runs through everything here, but not all water is safe to drink. Taste this sample and tell me what you detect. Use your developed senses. Your life may depend on it." Ben uncorked the vial and smelled the contents. Water, but with a faint chemical odor underneath. He took a tiny sip and immediately spat it out. The taste was subtly wrong, a metallic aftertaste that suggested chemical contamination. His radio crackled. "Excellent, Ben. Most people would have assumed the water was safe because it appears clear. But you detected the industrial solvent," I added. "Colorless, odorless to most people, but toxic in larger quantities. You're beginning to understand the game." "Where's Marcus Chen?" Ben demanded. "Follow the arrow. Your next test is waiting." Ben looked east and saw nothing but dense forest. No trail, no obvious landmarks. But as he moved in that direction, his investigative intuition began picking up subtle signs. A broken branch here, a disturbed patch of moss there. Someone had passed this way recently, leaving a trail that was nearly invisible, but just detectable to someone with his training. The trail led to another ravine, this one smaller and shallower than the first. At the bottom, Ben found a camping setup, a small tent, sleeping bag, and backpack that he recognized as expensive outdoor gear. But something was wrong with the scene. Ben climbed down carefully and examined the campsite. The tent was set up correctly, but too perfectly. The sleeping bag was arranged as if for a photograph. The backpack was positioned at an angle that suggested it had been placed rather than dropped. And then he noticed something else. The tent's zipper was on the wrong side. Ben had helped set up thousands of tents during his ranger years, and he knew that most people were consistent in how they oriented their shelters. The zipper almost always faced east or south to catch morning sun and avoid prevailing winds. This tent was positioned with the zipper facing north. He keyed his radio. The campsite is fake. Chen was never here. Very good, Ben. Most search and rescue teams would have spent hours processing that scene, trying to determine what happened to Marcus. But you saw through the deception in minutes. Your pattern recognition is truly exceptional. Stop playing games, Carver. Tell me where he is. The games are just beginning. Look inside the tent. Ben unzipped the tent and crawled inside. On the floor was a manila folder containing what appeared to be police reports and crime scene photographs. As Ben flipped through the documents, his blood ran cold. The files contained detailed information about his own search and rescue cases from the past 3 years. Photos of crime scenes he'd worked, reports he'd filed, even personal details about the families of missing persons he'd helped find. "You've been watching me for a long time," Ben said into the radio. 2 years, Ben. Ever since I began planning this experiment, I needed to understand exactly how your mind works, how you process information, how you make decisions under pressure. I've studied you more thoroughly than any subject in my entire career. Ben felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. This wasn't a random encounter. Carver had been stalking him, learning his methods, preparing for this exact confrontation. "But knowledge has limitations," Carver continued. "I can predict many of your responses, but not all of them. That's what makes this interesting. Your intuitive abilities represent variables that can't be fully calculated." At the bottom of the folder was a photograph that made Ben's hands shake. It showed him from a distance, taken outside his apartment building about a week ago. In the background, his ex-wife could be seen getting into her car. "My personal life is off limits," Ben said quietly. "Everything is relevant data, Ben. Your divorce 3 years ago was finalized 6 months after you left the Ranger Service. The stress of your job contributed to the end of your marriage. Too many long absences, too many dangerous situations, too much psychological pressure. Sound familiar?" Ben closed the folder and crawled out of the tent. His anger was building, but he forced himself to stay focused. Carver was trying to provoke an emotional response, to make him act impulsively. "You're wasting time, Ben. Marcus has approximately 4 hours of daylight left. After that, his situation becomes critical. Give me the next clue." "Look up." Ben raised his eyes and saw something that shouldn't have been there. A small mirror, about 6 inches square, hanging from a branch about 20 feet above the ground. It was positioned to reflect sunlight down into the ravine. "Light travels in straight lines," Carver's voice said. "Follow the reflection." Ben moved around the ravine until the mirror's reflection pointed him in a specific direction, due south, toward a section of forest that looked impenetrably dense. As he pushed through the undergrowth, Ben's spatial memory began working, the final and most powerful of his abilities. This skill had saved his life more than once. The ability to remember exact details of locations he'd visited, sometimes years before, and to navigate based on those mental maps. Something about this area was familiar. Ben stopped and closed his eyes, letting his spatial memory work. The slope of the ground, the particular mix of tree species, the sound of water somewhere in the distance. He'd been here before. Suddenly it came to him. 5 years ago, during his 2nd year as a ranger, he'd responded to a call about a missing geology professor who'd been collecting rock samples. Ben had found the man injured, but alive in a small cave system about half a mile from this exact spot. If Carver had studied Ben's case files as thoroughly as he claimed, he would know about that rescue. And if he wanted to test Ben's spatial memory, the caves would be the perfect location. Ben changed direction, heading southwest toward where he remembered the cave entrance being located. The terrain was treacherous. Loose rock, steep slopes, and hidden holes that could easily break an ankle. But his spatial memory guided him with precision, remembering not just the destination, but the safest route to reach it. 20 minutes later, he found the cave entrance, partially hidden behind a cluster of fallen boulders. But as he approached, Ben's human presence detection ability went into overdrive. Someone was nearby, watching him. "Very impressive, Ben." Carver's voice came from somewhere above. "You navigated directly to a location you visited once, 5 years ago, using only terrain memory. That level of spatial awareness is genuinely extraordinary." Ben looked up, but couldn't see Carver anywhere. The man was well concealed, probably using military-grade camouflage techniques. "Is Marcus in the cave?" Ben asked. "Marcus is in a location where his survival depends on your ability to solve the remaining challenges. But first I want to tell you why I became what I am." Ben was examining the cave entrance while listening. The opening was narrow, but he could see light coming from somewhere deeper inside, which meant there was another exit or artificial illumination. "After my family died," Carver continued, "I began questioning everything I thought I knew about human behavior. I had spent 20 years studying criminal psychology, had helped capture some of the most dangerous predators in the country. But I couldn't predict or prevent the one event that mattered most." "So you became a predator yourself?" Ben said as he squeezed through the cave entrance. "I became a researcher. Ben, do you know what I discovered during my years in the FBI? That exceptional individuals like yourself are statistical anomalies. Your combination of natural abilities occurs in less than 1% of the population. You represent an evolutionary adaptation that most people don't even know exists." The cave was larger inside than Ben had remembered. Someone had been here recently. The floor was swept clean, and there were marks on the walls that looked like equipment had been mounted there. "But here's what fascinated me," Carver continued. "When I studied your case files, I found that your success rate actually improved in situations where conventional wisdom suggested you should fail. The more dangerous and complex the case, the better your performance. It's as if stress enhances your natural abilities rather than degrading them." Ben found what he was looking for, a passage leading deeper into the cave system with artificial lighting strung along the walls. Someone had prepared this space carefully. "That's the question I need answered, Ben. How far can those abilities be pushed? What happens when someone with your skills faces challenges specifically designed to exploit every weakness, every limitation?" Ben followed the lighted passage, which led steadily downward into the mountain. The air was cool and dry, and he could hear the sound of running water somewhere ahead. "You're insane, Carver." "No, Ben. I'm conducting the most important research of my career. You see, after my family died, I realized that random events, drunk drivers, equipment failures, natural disasters, those things will always be unpredictable. But human capability, human adaptability, human survival instinct, those can be measured, tested, optimized." The passage opened into a larger chamber, and Ben stopped short. The space had been converted into something resembling a research laboratory. Battery-powered lights hung from the ceiling, tables held various equipment, and the walls were covered with maps, photographs, and what looked like psychological charts. But what caught Ben's attention was the far end of the chamber, where Marcus Chen sat tied to a chair, very much alive, but looking exhausted and frightened. "Marcus!" Ben called out. But as he started forward, Carver's voice stopped him. "Don't move, Ben. The floor between you and Marcus is equipped with pressure sensors. One wrong step, and Marcus's chair drops into a pit that I've prepared. It's not deep enough to kill him immediately, but deep enough to make rescue impossible." Ben could see now that Marcus was positioned on what looked like a wooden platform suspended over a hole in the cave floor. "This is your final test, Ben. The floor between you and Marcus is a grid, 10 feet by 10 feet. 9 of the squares are safe to step on. 1 will trigger the drop mechanism. Your challenge is to reach Marcus using only your natural abilities to determine the safe path." Ben studied the floor carefully. It appeared to be made of stone, with no obvious visual differences between the squares that would indicate the trap. "How do I know you won't trigger it regardless of what I do?" Ben asked. "Because that wouldn't serve my research purposes. I need to know whether your intuitive abilities can detect a mechanical trap that has no visual or auditory cues. This test requires pure instinct." Ben approached the edge of the grid and knelt down. He placed his hand flat on the stone and closed his eyes, trying to feel for any vibrations or variations that might indicate which square contained the trigger mechanism. The stone felt solid and uniform, but as Ben moved his hand across different sections, he began to detect something. Not vibrations exactly, but minute differences in temperature. One section of the floor was slightly warmer than the others, suggesting different materials or construction underneath. "Interesting approach, Ben. Most people would try to detect mechanical differences. You're looking for thermal signatures." Ben ignored Carver and continued his examination. The thermal difference was subtle but definite. The warmer section was in the 3rd row, 2nd column from the left. That had to be the trigger. Ben stood and began carefully stepping across the grid, avoiding the warmer section. His natural balance and spatial awareness guided him across, and within seconds, he reached Marcus. "Ben," Marcus said weakly, "this guy's crazy. He's been keeping me here for over 24 hours, asking me questions about you, about your reputation." Ben was examining Marcus's restraints, professional zip ties that would require a knife to cut. But as he reached for his multi-tool, Carver's voice echoed through the chamber. "Congratulations, Ben. You've successfully completed all 5 tests. Your abilities are indeed as exceptional as your reputation suggests." "Let Marcus go," Ben said. "I will. But first, I want you to understand something. This experiment wasn't just about testing your abilities, it was about testing my own." Ben looked around, trying to locate Carver's position. The man's voice seemed to be coming from multiple directions, suggesting a speaker system. "You see, Ben, I needed to know whether pure intelligence could successfully predict and control natural talent, whether I could design challenges that would push your abilities to their limits while maintaining complete control over the outcome." "And?" Ben asked as he cut Marcus's restraints. "I failed." Ben stopped cutting. "What?" "My most significant error was underestimating the speed at which you would solve the challenges. I calculated that each test would take you approximately 45 minutes. Instead, you completed all 5 in under 3 hours. My second error was assuming that your abilities operated independently. Instead, they appear to work synergistically, each one enhancing the others." Marcus was now free, but Ben could see that he was weak from his captivity. "Can you walk?" Ben asked. Marcus nodded. "I think so." "But my greatest error," Carver continued, "was believing that I could maintain emotional detachment while conducting this experiment. Watching you work, Ben, has been genuinely inspiring. You represent something I thought I'd lost faith in, evidence that human beings are capable of extraordinary adaptation." Ben helped Marcus to his feet and began guiding him toward the passage leading out of the chamber. "Where are you, Carver?" Ben called out. "I'm leaving, Ben. This experiment is concluded. You've given me the data I needed, and I've given you something as well. Confirmation that your abilities are genuine, measurable, and perhaps more extraordinary than even you realized. You can't just walk away from this. You kidnapped an innocent person." Marcus was never in real danger. The pit under his chair is only 3 feet deep, and there's food and water hidden in this chamber that would have lasted him a week. I needed the threat to be credible enough to motivate you, but I'm not actually a killer. Ben and Marcus reached the passage leading upward, but Ben stopped. Something about Carver's tone suggested this wasn't over. "What aren't you telling me?" Ben asked. There was a long pause before Carver responded. "I'm dying, Ben. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 6 months ago. Stage 4, inoperable. I have perhaps 2 months left." Ben felt a strange mix of emotions, anger at what Carver had done, but also sympathy for a man who'd lost everything and was now facing his own mortality. "That doesn't justify what you did here," Ben said. "No, it doesn't, but it explains it. I needed to know, before I die, whether human potential has limits that can't be overcome through intelligence alone. You've shown me that it doesn't. You could have just asked for my help. Would you have agreed to be tested this way voluntarily?" Ben considered the question. "No, probably not." "Then you understand my dilemma. Ben, I'm going to disappear now. You'll never see me again, and I'll never contact you. But I want you to know that this experience has restored something I thought I'd lost: faith in human capability." Ben could hear footsteps echoing from somewhere else in the cave system, growing more distant. "Carver!" Ben called out, but there was no response. Ben and Marcus made their way back through the cave system and emerged into the late afternoon sunlight. Ben immediately called for medical evacuation for Marcus and law enforcement backup, then sat down on a fallen log to process what had happened. His radio crackled one final time. "Ben, this is Dr. William Carver. I want to thank you for participating in the most important research of my career. The data you've provided will be included in a paper I'm leaving with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. Maybe it will help them understand that human intuition and natural ability represent resources that shouldn't be overlooked." "Carver? One final thing, Ben. Your ex-wife contacted you last week about getting back together. You haven't returned her call because you're afraid that your job will destroy the relationship again. But she already knows who you are, what you do, what it costs you. The question isn't whether you can change, it's whether you trust her enough to accept that love can coexist with your calling." Ben stared at the radio, shocked by the accuracy of Carver's psychological insight. "Sometimes, Ben, the greatest discoveries come from taking risks that pure logic would advise against. Consider that my final research recommendation." The radio went silent. 3 hours later, Ben was giving his statement to Sheriff Martinez, while paramedics evaluated Marcus Chen. The cave laboratory had been completely cleared out by the time the law enforcement team reached it, with no trace of Carver or his equipment. "This guy covered his tracks like a professional," Martinez said. "We'll put out a bolo, but if he's got 2 months to live and serious resources, he could disappear completely." Ben nodded, but part of him hoped Carver would succeed in vanishing. The man was clearly guilty of kidnapping and a dozen other crimes, but Ben couldn't shake the feeling that something valuable had come from the experience. That evening, sitting in his truck outside his apartment building, Ben pulled out his phone and scrolled to his ex-wife's contact information. Her message from the previous week was brief. "Been thinking about us. Would you like to have dinner and talk?" Ben stared at the message for a long time, thinking about Carver's final words. Pure logic suggested that calling her would lead to disappointment for both of them. His job hadn't changed, his personality hadn't changed, and the pressures that had ended their marriage were still present. But maybe Carver was right. Maybe the greatest discoveries came from taking risks that logic would advise against. Ben typed a simple response. Yes. When and where? 2 months later, Ben received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a research paper titled Natural Intuition vs. Analytical Intelligence, a comparative study of human problem-solving capabilities. The author was listed as Dr. William Carver. The paper was brilliant, detailed, and concluded with a recommendation that law enforcement agencies should actively recruit individuals with natural abilities like Ben's, rather than relying solely on traditional training and analytical methods. An accompanying note was brief. Thank you for helping me understand that human potential isn't limited by what we can measure or predict. Some capabilities transcend calculation. W.C. Ben never heard from or about William Carver again, but he kept the research paper in his desk drawer, and whenever he was working a particularly difficult case, he would remember Carver's words about the value of trusting instinct over pure logic. And 6 months later, when Ben remarried his ex-wife in a small ceremony overlooking the Olympic Mountains, he realized that Carver had been right about something else. Sometimes the most important decisions in life required the courage to trust abilities that couldn't be measured or explained, only experienced. The forest had taught Ben many things over the years, but his encounter with William Carver had taught him the most important lesson of all: that human potential, at its best, transcends the boundaries between what we can calculate and what we can simply know. Daniel Torres adjusted his backpack and checked his GPS for the third time in 5 minutes. 6:47 a.m. at Olympic National Park, and morning fog still covered the century-old trees like a ghostly veil. Coffee steamed from his aluminum mug as he reviewed the report he'd received at 5:30. Sarah Mitchell, 23, University of Washington biology student, hadn't returned from her campsite on the Hoh River Trail, last seen yesterday at 2:30 p.m. 7 years as a forest ranger had taught Daniel that the first hours were crucial. Lost people tended to follow predictable patterns. They always went downhill, always looked for water, always left traces. But something about this case already bothered him. Sarah was experienced, had proper equipment, and the weather had been stable. It didn't make sense. He closed the report and grabbed his radio. Base, this is Daniel Torres. Starting search on Hoh River Trail, Sector 7. Estimated return 6 p.m. Copy that, Daniel. Weather forecast shows temperature dropping to 36 degrees after 4 p.m. Dense fog after 5 p.m. Daniel turned off the radio and began walking. The trail was damp from last week's rains, perfect for tracking. His steps echoed softly on the ground covered with golden and red leaves. Autumn at Olympic transformed the forest into a cathedral of colors, but also created traps. Leaves hid holes, masked sounds, and darkness came too early. 20 minutes later, Daniel found the first sign. Female boot prints, approximately size 8, firm and regular stride. He crouched and examined the marks. The edges were still defined, no signs of erosion from rain. Definitely from yesterday afternoon. Sarah had passed through here, following the official trail. He continued following the footprints, which maintained a consistent pattern until the first deviation from the main trail. There, the marks became deeper, as if she had hesitated. Daniel stopped and looked around. Why would she have left the main trail? That's when he noticed the first strange sign. Absolute silence. No birds were singing, no squirrels running between trees, not even wind rustling through leaves. Daniel had spent enough time in the forest to know this type of silence only happened when something was fundamentally wrong. Animals sensed danger before humans did. He activated his first special ability, exceptional tracking. His eyes moved systematically across the terrain, searching for evidence others wouldn't see. Besides Sarah's footprints, he found other marks. A branch broken at 6 feet high. Impossible for her. Someone else had passed through here. The male footprints were subtle, almost imperceptible. Whoever it was knew how to walk without leaving traces. But Daniel could see them, small pressures in the earth, slightly displaced leaves, an almost invisible drop of mud on a rock. He followed both sets of footprints for another 15 minutes until reaching a small clearing. There, Sarah's footprints stopped abruptly. The male ones continued in a circle around the spot where she had stopped, as if someone had been observing her. Daniel crouched again, examining the ground more carefully. Were there signs of struggle? No. Signs that she had been dragged? Also no. It was as if she had simply vanished. He activated his second ability, nature reading. He observed the behavior of animals around him. A family of squirrels had abandoned their nests in nearby trees. There were deer tracks that veered sharply away from the area as if something had frightened them. And stranger still, there were tracks of a raven that had walked on the ground, something they only did when investigating something dead. But there was no body, no blood, nothing. Daniel checked his watch. 8:15 a.m. He had been following tracks for an hour and a half, and the feeling that something was deeply wrong only increased. He decided to expand the search in concentric circles around the clearing. It was on the second circle that he found Sarah's backpack. It was carefully positioned on a rock, as if someone had placed it there purposefully. It wasn't thrown or abandoned. It was displayed. Daniel approached cautiously, his gloved hands opening the compartments one by one. Everything was there. Extra clothes, food, camping equipment, wallet with ID. But something obvious was missing, her cell phone. And there was something extra, a carefully folded sheet of paper that wasn't part of Sarah's original belongings. Daniel unfolded the paper. It was a printed page with a single paragraph. The average person, when lost in wilderness, survives 72 hours before panic sets in completely. The trained individual extends this to perhaps 120 hours. But the truly exceptional mind, well, that remains to be tested. Welcome to the experiment, Ranger Torres. Your reputation precedes you. Daniel's blood ran cold. Someone knew who he was. Someone had been planning this. This wasn't a random disappearance, it was a trap. He activated his third ability, human presence detection. The sensation hit him immediately, like static electricity on his skin. Someone was watching him. Right now. Daniel didn't look up immediately. Instead, he pretended to continue examining the backpack while his peripheral vision scanned the tree line. There, a flash of movement about 50 yards north behind a massive Douglas fir. Too deliberate to be an animal. He stood slowly, casually, and began walking in the opposite direction, deeper into the forest. His fourth ability kicked in, investigative intuition. The pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't about Sarah at all. She was bait. Someone had taken her to lure him here. But why him specifically? Daniel had handled dozens of missing person cases, but he'd also consulted on several criminal investigations. His tracking abilities had helped solve 3 murder cases in the past 5 years. Someone who knew about those cases might see him as a challenge. The thought sent a chill down his spine. He continued walking, following what appeared to be a game trail, but his fifth ability, natural orientation, told him he was being herded. The subtle signs were there. Fallen logs positioned to guide his path, broken branches indicating the easier route. Someone wanted him to go in a specific direction. Daniel stopped and made a decision. Instead of following the suggested path, he turned sharply west, using the declining angle of filtered sunlight to maintain his bearing. If someone was playing a game, he wouldn't play by their rules. That's when he heard it. A slow, deliberate clapping. The sound echoed through the trees, impossible to pinpoint exactly. Then a voice, clear and educated, with a slight East Coast accent. "Impressive, Mr. Torres. Most people would have followed the path I laid out. You're already proving more interesting than your predecessors." Daniel's hand instinctively moved to the bear spray on his belt. "Where is Sarah Mitchell?" "Safe, for now. Whether she remains so depends entirely on how stimulating our interaction proves to be." The voice seemed to come from multiple directions at once. suggesting the speaker was moving between concealed positions. Professional. Military training, maybe. Or law enforcement. "What do you want?" Daniel called out. "A conversation between professionals. You see, Mr. Torres, I've studied your work. Your tracking abilities are legendary in this region. Your consultation on the Bellingham murders was particularly elegant. I'm curious to see how those skills translate to a more personal scenario." Daniel's investigative intuition sparked. Bellingham murders. That case was 3 years old and the details hadn't been released to the public. Whoever this was had access to law enforcement files. "Your former law enforcement," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. A pause. Then soft laughter. "Very good. FBI, actually. Or former FBI, to be precise. Dr. Michael Voss, formerly Special Agent Michael Voss, Behavioral Analysis Unit." The name triggered a memory. Daniel had heard it before in conversations with detectives. Voss, brilliant profiler who'd lost his career after... What? A case gone wrong? "I remember you," Daniel said, pieces clicking together. "The Riverside Strangler case. You couldn't catch him." The silence stretched longer this time. When Voss spoke again, his voice had lost its casual tone. "He killed 11 women. The last one was my sister, Rebecca, 26-year-old kindergarten teacher. I spent 3 years building a profile, following leads, getting close, but never close enough." Daniel kept moving, but slowly. His sixth ability, spatial memory, building a mental map of the area. He remembered this section of forest from a search and rescue training exercise 4 years ago. There was a ranger station about 2 miles southeast, abandoned but still structurally sound. "So you decided to become what you couldn't catch?" Daniel asked. "I decided to become better than what I couldn't catch. The Riverside Strangler was sloppy, emotional, driven by compulsions he couldn't control. I am none of those things. I am deliberate, methodical, and completely in control of every variable. Except me." Another pause. "Except you. Which is why this is so delicious, Mr. Torres. Finally, a worthy opponent. Someone whose abilities rival my planning. Sarah Mitchell was simply bait. Nothing personal against her. She was chosen because her disappearance would bring you to me." Daniel's mind raced. If Voss was former FBI, he'd have tactical training, weapons training, psychological manipulation skills. But he'd also have the same weakness many analytical minds had, overconfidence in planning versus adaptation. "You've made one mistake," Daniel said. "Oh? Do enlighten me." "You told me who you are. That means you're planning to kill me anyway, which means Sarah is probably already dead. Actually, no. Sarah is very much alive and will remain so if you prove entertaining enough. You see, Mr. Torres, I'm not a mindless killer. I'm a researcher. Sarah is my control group. You are my test subject. The question I'm investigating is simple. When a superior intellect with unlimited preparation time faces off against natural instinct and years of experience, which proves more effective?" Daniel stopped walking. His human presence detection ability was screaming now. Voss was close, probably within 30 yards. "Show yourself," Daniel said. "Not yet. First, I want to see more of your famous abilities in action. Tell me, can you find the other participants in my study?" Daniel's blood chilled. "Others?" 3, to be precise. All missing persons reported in the past 6 months. All chosen specifically for the unique skills they would require from their potential rescuers. You're actually the 4th test subject, Mr. Torres. The first 3 were disappointing. The implications hit Daniel like a physical blow. 3 other people, other professionals like him, had been lured here by missing persons cases, and they had failed Voss's test. Where are they? Oh, they're around, in various states of preservation. Would you like to see them? Consider it motivation. Daniel's spatial memory clicked. The abandoned ranger station. If Voss had been using this area for months, that's where he'd set up his base of operations. Remote, defensible, with multiple escape routes. But saying so would reveal how much Daniel had figured out. Instead, he activated his exceptional tracking again, scanning the ground for any signs of the previous victims. And there they were, faint but visible to his trained eye. Multiple sets of tracks, weeks old, all leading in the same general direction. Southeast, toward the station. Found them already, haven't you? Voss's voice carried a note of genuine admiration. Remarkable. It took Agent Harrison 4 hours to notice those tracks. Of course, by then, it was far too late for him. Agent Harrison, FBI. That would have been the second test subject, probably. Someone with investigation skills but not wilderness experience. What happened to Harrison? He relied too heavily on technology, GPS, radio, cell phone. I demonstrated how useless such devices are when you control the environment. He lasted 18 hours before the psychological pressure broke him. Daniel was building a clearer picture. Voss wasn't just killing, he was conducting psychological experiments, testing different types of trained professionals against controlled stresses, and he was learning from each iteration, becoming more effective. And the others? Dr. Patricia Kim, psychiatrist specializing in trauma response. She understood the psychological game immediately, but lacked practical survival skills. Fascinating to watch, really. Brilliant analysis of what I was doing, but couldn't translate that knowledge into effective action. Daniel's investigative intuition was working overtime. 3 test subjects meant 3 different professional skill sets. Harrison, law enforcement, Kim, psychological expertise. And the third? The first one, Daniel said, military. Captain James Rodriguez, Army Rangers, survival training, tactical experience, combat psychology. He was actually quite impressive. Lasted almost 36 hours, came very close to reaching me. His failure was interesting. He understood the tactical situation perfectly, but couldn't adapt when I introduced variables outside his military training. Daniel was starting to understand Voss's methodology. Each victim had represented a different approach to the same problem, a dangerous predator with superior position and preparation time. Law enforcement had failed because it relied on backup and technology. Psychology had failed because analysis without action was useless. Military had failed because it was trained for known enemy types and conventional tactics. But Daniel represented something different. He was a synthesis. Investigation skills, survival experience, intuitive pattern recognition, and years of dealing with unpredictable wilderness situations. And now you want to test someone who combines all those skill sets, Daniel said. Precisely. You see, Mr. Torres, you understand the experiment. This isn't personal malice, it's research. I need to know if the perfect predator can be consistently superior to any type of human opposition, or if there are variables that can still disrupt a perfectly executed plan. Daniel checked his watch. 11:30 a.m. He'd been in the forest for almost 5 hours. The temperature was dropping, and he could see his breath now. Voss was right about one thing. Environmental factors were becoming a consideration. But Daniel had an advantage Voss might not have considered. His spatial memory of this area included details from 4 years ago, including the location of emergency supply caches left by the Ranger Service. If he could reach one. You're thinking about the emergency supplies cached at grid reference 4723 Alpha, Voss said, as if reading his mind. I'm afraid you'll find them insufficient. Daniel's heart sank. Voss had been planning this for months, maybe longer. He'd have located and compromised any obvious resources. However, Voss continued, I am curious about something. Your reputation suggests abilities that border on the supernatural. Enhanced tracking, environmental awareness, spatial memory that defies normal human limitations. How much of that is training, and how much is genuine intuitive ability? Daniel realized what Voss was really after. He wasn't just testing whether he could win against different types of professionals. He was trying to understand the source of exceptional human capabilities. Was it training, intuition, or something else? "Why don't you come find out?" Daniel said. "Oh, I intend to, but first I have a small demonstration prepared, a way to calibrate your abilities against a known standard." The forest fell silent again. Daniel's human presence detection told him Voss had withdrawn, but not far. He was setting up something, another test, another variable to introduce into the experiment. Daniel decided to take control of the situation. Instead of waiting for Voss's next move, he would force one. He began moving southeast toward the ranger station, but not directly. Instead, he used his natural orientation to maintain a spiral approach, making it difficult for Voss to predict his exact path. After 20 minutes of careful movement, Daniel's exceptional tracking ability picked up something new. Fresh footprints, less than an hour old, leading away from his position. But these weren't Voss's careful, nearly invisible tracks. These were heavy, uneven, desperate. Someone running. Daniel followed the tracks for 100 yards before he found her. Sarah Mitchell, very much alive, tied to a tree with professional precision. She was conscious, gagged, but unharmed. Her eyes went wide when she saw him approach. But Daniel's human presence detection was screaming warnings. This was too easy, too obvious. "It's a trap," he whispered to Sarah as he approached. "He's watching." Sarah nodded frantically and tried to communicate something through her gag. Daniel noticed her eyes kept darting to something behind him and to the left. Daniel pretended to work on the ropes while actually scanning the area with his peripheral vision. There, a thin wire stretched between two trees at ankle height, almost invisible among the fallen leaves. Beyond that, another one. Voss had turned the area around Sarah into a snare field. But that revealed something important. Voss was working alone. He couldn't maintain direct observation while setting complex traps. He was relying on predictability, that Daniel would rush to save Sarah without checking for dangers. Daniel activated his investigative intuition and studied the trap layout. The wires were positioned to channel him toward a specific tree, probably where Voss was waiting. But there was another pattern. The gaps between traps formed a path that led away from Sarah, deeper into the forest. Voss wasn't trying to capture him here. He was trying to separate him from Sarah, force him to choose between saving her and pursuing his tormentor. Daniel made his choice. He began loudly cutting Sarah's ropes, making enough noise to ensure Voss could hear. But instead of actually freeing her, he used his wilderness skills to create a convincing duplicate. Bunched clothing and leaves that would look like a person from a distance. Then he whispered to Sarah, "Stay exactly where you are. Don't move, don't make noise. I'll be back." He left her tied but positioned so she could see him, and began following the trap-free path deeper into the forest, making enough noise to suggest he was pursuing his target. The path led exactly where his spatial memory had predicted, toward the abandoned ranger station. As Daniel approached the building, his nature-reading ability told him the story. Birds had been avoiding this area for weeks. Small animals had changed their traditional paths. The natural ecosystem had been disrupted by prolonged human presence. The station itself was a small log building with boarded windows and a metal roof. But Daniel's exceptional tracking revealed recent modifications, fresh tool marks on the boards, new locks, and most tellingly, a small generator hidden behind the structure, still warm. Voss had been living here. Daniel circled the building carefully, noting every entrance and exit. His spatial memory provided the layout from 4 years ago, but he had to assume Voss had made changes. There was the main door facing east, a back door probably blocked. Windows on north and south sides, boarded but potentially removable from inside. And then Daniel noticed something that made him smile. Voss had made a critical error. The generator was positioned to provide power to the building, but its exhaust was oriented toward the prevailing wind. Anyone inside for extended periods would be exposed to carbon monoxide accumulation. Voss, for all his intelligence, had overlooked a basic wilderness safety principle, which meant he wasn't planning to stay inside very long. This was a meeting place, not a stronghold. Daniel's human presence detection confirmed it. Voss was inside, waiting. "Mr. Torres," Voss's voice carried clearly through the walls. "I know you're out there. Please come in. I have something to show you." Daniel approached the main door cautiously. It was unlocked. Inside, the station had been converted into something between a laboratory and a command center. Maps covered the walls, marked with tracking data for all 4 test subjects. Computer equipment hummed quietly, powered by the generator. And in the center of the room, 3 photographs were displayed on easels like trophies. Agent Harrison, Dr. Kim, and Captain Rodriguez, all deceased. But Daniel's attention was immediately drawn to Voss himself. Mid-40s, average height, thinning brown hair, wearing expensive outdoor gear. He could have been any hiker or researcher, except for his eyes, cold, analytical, completely devoid of empathy. "Welcome to my laboratory, Mr. Torres. As you can see, you're joining distinguished company." Daniel stayed near the door, his senses alert for any sign of additional traps. "Why show me this? Because I want you to understand the scope of what you're facing. This isn't a crime of passion or even a traditional serial killing. This is methodical research into the limits of human capability under extreme stress." Voss gestured to the maps on the wall. Each subject was tested according to specific parameters. Harrison, law enforcement training versus superior tactical position. Kim, psychological insight versus physical threats. Rodriguez, military training versus unconventional warfare. And me? You represent the synthesis. Multiple skill sets, decades of experience, natural abilities that exceed normal human ranges. You're my final test subject, Mr. Torres. If I can defeat you under controlled conditions, then I will have proven that superior intellect and preparation can overcome any form of human opposition. Daniel studied the maps while Voss talked. His spatial memory was building a complete picture of the area, including locations where the other victims had been found. But there was something else, patterns in the movement data that didn't quite fit. "You made a mistake with Rodriguez," Daniel said. Voss's expression shifted slightly. "Oh? The tracking data shows he got within 50 yards of this building, but you said he lasted 36 hours. If he'd made it this close, a trained soldier would have observed the position, found the weaknesses, planned an assault. But your data shows he turned away. Your point? You had to intervene directly. Break character. Reveal yourself to redirect him, which means your perfect psychological experiment required you to abandon the clinical objectivity you claim to prize." For the first time, Voss looked genuinely annoyed. A minor adjustment to maintain experimental conditions. A fundamental flaw in your methodology. You can't claim to be testing pure human capability against superior planning if you have to actively manipulate the test conditions. Voss stood up abruptly. "You're trying to goad me into making an error. I'm pointing out that you've already made several. The generator positioning that's slowly poisoning the air in here. The trap layout around Sarah that reveals you're working alone. The need to intervene directly with Rodriguez that proves your experiment isn't as controlled as you claim." Daniel was activating his psychological insight now, reading Voss's reactions. The former FBI agent was brilliant, but he had the classic weakness of many analytical minds. He couldn't tolerate having his logic challenged. "And the biggest mistake," Daniel continued, "is assuming that natural ability is something you can test in a controlled environment. You've removed me from my normal context and put me into yours. That's not testing my capabilities. It's testing how well I can adapt to your preferred conditions. Enough. Voss pulled out a Glock 19 from beneath his jacket. Perhaps a more direct approach is called for. But Daniel was already moving. His natural orientation had told him exactly where he was in relation to the door, and his spatial memory provided a complete layout of the room. He dove behind a desk as Voss fired, the bullet splintering wood inches from his head. "You see," Daniel called out, "you can't maintain clinical objectivity when your subject doesn't behave according to your parameters. This isn't research, it's just ego." Another shot, closer this time. But Daniel could hear something in Voss's breathing, the beginning of panic. The former FBI agent was losing control of his experiment, and that loss of control was causing the same psychological pressure he'd inflicted on his victims. Daniel's investigative intuition told him Voss would try to re-establish dominance by threatening Sarah. But that would require leaving the station, moving back to where she was tied, and exposing himself to pursuit across terrain Daniel knew better than he did. "Your sister Rebecca," Daniel said, staying low behind the desk. "How do you think she'd feel about what you've become?" The third shot went wide, hitting the wall. Voss was losing his tactical composure. "You don't know anything about Rebecca." "I know she was a kindergarten teacher. I know she dedicated her life to helping children. I know she wouldn't want her death to be the excuse for murdering innocent people. She died because I wasn't good enough, because I couldn't think like a killer. So you became what you couldn't catch. But you're still not good enough, Voss, because you're still making the same mistake. You're trying to control variables that can't be controlled." Daniel heard Voss reloading and used the moment to move. His spatial memory guided him to the back of the room, where a small window had been boarded over, but not completely sealed. He could see daylight through the gaps. "You want to know the difference between us, Voss? You study predators from books and profiles. I've spent 7 years dealing with real ones. Bears, cougars, human threats. And the one thing I've learned is that the most dangerous predator is always the one that becomes so confident in its own intelligence that it stops paying attention to immediate threats." Daniel could hear Voss moving, trying to get a clear shot. But the former FBI agent was making too much noise, breathing too heavily. The psychological pressure was working both ways now. "Like the carbon monoxide from your generator that's been building up in here for the past 20 minutes, Daniel added. The silence that followed told Daniel his guess had been correct. Voss hadn't noticed the growing effects of the poorly ventilated exhaust, but Daniel, with his wilderness experience, had recognized the symptoms immediately. Slight dizziness, the beginning of impaired judgment. It explained why Voss's shots were getting progressively less accurate. "You're lying," Voss said, but Daniel could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Am I? When's the last time you were outside? How long have you been in here with the generator running? Are you feeling dizzy yet? Having trouble concentrating?" Daniel heard Voss curse and move toward the door. Perfect. Once outside, Voss would lose his tactical advantage and have to pursue Daniel across terrain, where natural abilities trumped technological preparation. Daniel kicked out the loose boarding on the back window and slipped through just as Voss reached the front door. Now they were both outside, in Daniel's element. The pursuit that followed lasted 43 minutes. Voss had superior firepower and tactical training, but Daniel had something more valuable, complete familiarity with the terrain and natural abilities that let him navigate efficiently while Voss struggled with unfamiliar forest conditions. Daniel led his pursuer in a careful pattern, using his spatial memory to guide them toward a specific location he remembered from search and rescue training, an area where a rock slide years earlier had created unstable footing disguised by fallen leaves. When Voss finally caught up, breathing heavily and showing clear signs of carbon monoxide impairment, Daniel was ready. "This is where it ends," Daniel said, standing at the edge of the unstable area. "You have 2 choices. Walk away, turn yourself in, Let Sarah and me leave safely, or keep playing your game and find out what happens when natural instinct meets overconfidence. Voss raised his gun, but his hand was shaking now. The carbon monoxide, physical exertion and psychological pressure had taken their toll. I won't be defeated by some park ranger, he said. You already have been. The moment you decided you needed to prove your superiority, instead of just accepting that you failed to catch one killer, you started losing. This whole experiment has been about your ego, not research. Voss fired, but the shot went wide. Daniel stepped aside and watched as Voss tried to pursue, stepping directly onto the concealed, unstable ground. The rock slide that trapped Voss's leg wasn't fatal, but it was decisive. By the time Daniel returned with Sarah and called for backup, the former FBI agent was ready to surrender. As they waited for the helicopter to arrive, Daniel reflected on what he'd learned. Natural ability wasn't superior to intelligence and planning, but it was more adaptable. Voss had been so focused on controlling variables that he'd missed the most important variable of all, his own psychological need to prove superiority. How did you know about the carbon monoxide? Sarah asked as medics treated Voss. Experience, Daniel said. 7 years of dealing with people who thought they understood the wilderness better than they actually did. The forest teaches you humility if you let it. Sarah nodded, then asked the question Daniel had been dreading. What about the others? Harrison, Kim, Rodriguez? Daniel looked toward the ranger station, where a forensics team was already beginning their work. They died because they were fighting Voss's kind of battle instead of their own. Harrison tried to outthink him. Kim tried to out-analyze him. Rodriguez tried to out-soldier him. And you? I didn't try to beat him at his own game. I just stayed true to what I knew how to do and let his need to prove superiority work against him. As the helicopter lifted off with Voss in custody, Daniel felt the familiar peace of the forest returning. The investigation would continue. There would be reports and testimony and closure for the families of Voss's victims. But for now, Sarah was safe. The immediate threat was over, and Daniel had learned something valuable about the difference between intelligence and wisdom. The forest had taught him once again that the most dangerous predator was often the one that forgot it was still part of a larger ecosystem. True mastery, Daniel realized, wasn't about controlling variables. It was about adapting to them. And that was a lesson that could only be learned through experience, not study. The forest fell silent around them as they walked back toward the main trail, but this time it was the comfortable silence of nature at peace, not the ominous quiet of a predator's domain. Daniel Torres had passed his own test, not by proving superiority, but by remaining true to the skills and instincts that had kept him alive for 7 years in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Sometimes the perfect predator was simply the one that understood its own place in the natural order. Thomas Bennett's coffee was still steaming when the call came in at 6:47 a.m. October in Olympic National Park meant darkness until almost 7, and the ranger station felt like a bunker against the Washington drizzle hammering the windows. Tom had been awake since 5:30, same routine for the past 3 years since leaving the service. Coffee first, then equipment check, then whatever the forest decided to throw at him. Missing hiker on the Sol Duke Trail, dispatch crackled through his radio. Name's Jennifer Walsh, 28, solo backpacker, overdue at Hurricane Ridge by 18 hours. Tom set down his mug and reached for his gear vest. 3 years out of active ranger duty, but muscle memory never faded. GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency beacon, water purification tablets, rope, headlamp, backup batteries. His fingers moved through the checklist automatically while his mind processed the details. Solo hiker, 18 hours overdue, October weather turning nasty. Last known position, he asked into the radio. Checked in at Sol Duke Hot Springs yesterday around noon. Planned to camp at Seven Lakes Basin, summit Mount Storm King this morning. Tom pulled on his waterproof jacket and shouldered his pack. Mount Storm King wasn't technically challenging, but October storms could turn any trail deadly. As a contractor for search and rescue, he knew these mountains better than most active rangers. 7 years of full-time service had burned every trail, every ridge, every dangerous drop-off into his memory. The drive to Sol Duke took 45 minutes through morning fog that clung to the forest like smoke. Tom's headlights cut through grey air, illuminating Douglas firs that looked black in the early light. He'd done this drive hundreds of times, but something felt different this morning. The usual sounds were wrong. No birds, no small animals rustling in the underbrush. Even the rain seemed muted. He parked at the Sol Duke trailhead at 8:15 a.m. and stepped into the forest. The first thing Tom noticed was the silence. Olympic's old-growth forest was never truly quiet. There should have been Stella's jays calling, squirrels chattering, the distant drumming of woodpeckers. Instead, the only sound was water dripping from cedar boughs and his own breathing. Tom activated his first natural ability without thinking about it. Exceptional tracking had always been his strongest skill, an almost supernatural ability to read sign that others missed completely. Within 10 feet of the parking area, he found Jennifer Walsh's boot prints in a patch of soft earth beside the trail. Size 7 hiking boots, probably Merrill from the tread pattern. Her stride looked confident, unhurried. But there was something else. Overlapping her prints, pressed into the mud with deliberate precision, was a larger boot print. Size 11, aggressive lug sole, military style. The print was fresh, maybe 6 hours old, placed exactly on top of Jennifer's left boot impression. Tom crouched beside the prints, running his fingers along the edges. The placement wasn't accidental. Someone had studied Jennifer's track and stepped precisely on it, like they were measuring her stride or marking her passage. The depth suggested someone heavy, probably male, moving slowly and deliberately. He stood and scanned the forest around him. His skin prickled with the sensation that he was being watched, but he pushed the feeling aside. Focus on the immediate task. Find Jennifer Walsh. The trail climbed steadily through old-growth cedar and hemlock. Tom followed Jennifer's tracks easily. She stayed on the main trail, stopped occasionally to rest, stepped carefully around muddy sections. A responsible hiker who knew what she was doing, but the other tracks kept appearing. Every quarter mile, Tom found evidence of the unknown presence. Not continuous tracking, but specific places where someone had deliberately left sign. A boot print in soft earth beside a fallen log where Jennifer had stopped to retie her laces. A broken branch at exactly eye level where Jennifer would have ducked under a low-hanging cedar bough. A small pile of stones arranged in a triangle where the trail forked. Stones that hadn't been there yesterday, Tom was certain. By 10 a.m., Tom had climbed 1,500 feet, and the pattern was undeniable. Someone was following Jennifer Walsh, and they wanted Tom to know it. He stopped at a creek crossing where the trail split towards Seven Lakes Basin. Jennifer's tracks continued straight, but pressed into the muddy bank was something that made Tom's blood cold. A perfect impression of Jennifer's boot, but filled with small white stones arranged in a pattern. Someone had made a cast of her footprint and decorated it like a shrine. Tom pulled out his radio to call for backup, but static was all he got. The mountains interfered with radio signals, but not usually this completely. He checked his GPS unit. Signal lost. His cell phone showed no bars. For the first time in 3 years, Tom felt the familiar tension that had driven him out of ranger work. The weight of being responsible for someone else's life. The pressure of making the right choice when every option carried risk. He pressed forward towards Seven Lakes Basin. The forest began to feel alive around him in all the wrong ways. Tom's second natural ability kicked in, his ability to read nature's anomalous behavior. Something had disturbed the ecosystem badly. Birds weren't just quiet, they were gone completely. Small mammals had fled the area. Even the insects seemed muted. At 11:30 a.m., Tom found Jennifer's campsite. The tent was set up perfectly at Seven Lakes Basin, exactly where an experienced backpacker would choose. Protected from wind, near water, level ground. Her sleeping bag was laid out inside, her pack organized with military precision. A small camp stove sat beside the fire ring with a pot of what looked like yesterday's dinner. Freeze-dried pasta, barely touched. But Jennifer was nowhere in sight. Tom circled the campsite, his tracking ability working overtime. Jennifer's boots showed she'd walked around the camp, collected firewood, set up her tent. But then her tracks just stopped. No sign of struggle, no indication she'd left the camp voluntarily. Her tracks simply ended at the edge of the clearing, as if she'd vanished into thin air, except for one detail that made Tom's skin crawl. Beside the fire ring, someone had arranged Jennifer's hiking boots in a perfect line, pointing toward Mount Storm King. Inside each boot was a small piece of paper, rolled like a scroll. Tom pulled out the first scroll with steady hands, though his heart was racing. Written in precise block letters was a single line. 7 years of service. Tell me, Ranger Bennett, what have you learned? The second scroll contained a map, hand-drawn with remarkable accuracy. It showed the Seven Lakes Basin area with 2 routes marked in different colors. Red line, Jennifer's path, she chose trust. Blue line, your path, choose wisely. Tom's third natural ability activated without conscious thought. His ability to detect human presence, to sense when someone was watching him, suddenly screamed danger. Eyes on him, close. He spun around, scanning the tree line, and caught a glimpse of movement among the cedars 50 yards north. Not Jennifer's size, someone larger, moving with purpose. Where is she? Tom called out, his voice echoing across the basin. No response, but he felt the presence withdraw deeper into the forest. Tom studied the hand-drawn map more carefully. The blue route led up toward Mount Storm King summit, but not on any established trail. It wound through dense forest, over cliff sections that would be dangerous even in good weather. The red route led east toward a series of small caves near Bogachiel Peak. 2 choices. Classic search and rescue scenario. Split your resources and risk losing everything, or make a decision and live with the consequences. Tom's fourth ability, investigative intuition, told him this was a test. Someone who knew his background, his training, his history with impossible choices. The note had addressed him by name and rank. This wasn't random. He chose to follow the blue route toward Mount Storm King. The trail immediately left established paths and plunged into dense forest. Tom's fifth ability, natural orientation, kept him moving in the right direction, even as the handmade route wound through impossible terrain. Whoever had scouted this path knew the mountains as well as Tom did. For 2 hours, Tom climbed through increasingly difficult terrain. The route was marked with subtle signs, a broken branch here, a small cairn there, pieces of orange flagging tape tied to trees at exactly eye level, professional trail marking, the kind Tom had learned in ranger training. At 2 p.m., the forest opened into a small clearing Tom had never seen before, despite 7 years patrolling these mountains. In the center of the clearing was a large cedar stump, flat-topped like a table. On the stump sat a military-style field radio and a manila folder. Tom approached carefully, his senses on full alert. The radio crackled to life as he got within 10 feet. "Please, sit down, Ranger Bennett." The voice was calm, educated, with the measured tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We need to talk." Tom remained standing. "Where's Jennifer Walsh?" "Safe, for now. Please sit. I've gone to considerable trouble to arrange this meeting." "Who are you?" A pause. "Someone who understands the weight of impossible choices." Someone who knows what it's like to carry responsibility for life and death in these mountains. Tom's skin crawled. The voice was familiar in a way he couldn't place. I'm calling for backup. Your radio doesn't work here. Neither does your GPS or cell phone. I've made sure we won't be interrupted. The voice carried a note of satisfaction. Open the folder, Thomas. I think you'll find it interesting. Against his better judgment, Tom opened the manila folder. Inside were photographs and documents that made his blood freeze. Photos of him conducting searches over the past 3 years. Detailed reports of his methods, his routes, his decisions, personnel files from his ranger service, and newspaper clippings about a search and rescue operation from 8 years ago, the Cascade River incident. You remember, the voice said, August 15th, 8 years ago, the worst day of your career, the day you learned that good intentions and Forest Service training aren't enough. Tom's hands shook as he read the newspaper headline, 5 die in mountain rescue gone wrong, ranger decisions under investigation. You had to choose, the voice continued. The Patterson family, father, mother, 8-year-old daughter, trapped by a rock slide, or the university research team, 4 graduate students studying old-growth ecosystems caught in flash flooding, 2 simultaneous emergencies, 40 minutes apart, both requiring immediate response. Tom closed his eyes. He'd spent 3 years trying to forget the Cascade River incident. You chose the family, the voice said. Pure instinct, emotional response. The child's crying tipped the scales, didn't it? The family was closer, better access for evacuation. The research team was led by Marcus Chen, 24 years old, second-year medical student studying environmental medicine. Do you know what Marcus discovered 2 months before he died, Thomas? Tom's throat felt like sandpaper. A new protocol for treating hypothermia using natural compounds found in old-growth forests. His research might have saved hundreds of lives. Instead, he drowned in 6 feet of water while you carried a broken family to safety. The radio fell silent for a long moment. The Patterson family divorced 6 months later. The father blamed himself for getting them lost. The mother couldn't look at her husband without seeing Marcus Chen's face in the newspaper. The 8-year-old daughter developed severe PTSD and spent 2 years in therapy. What do you want? Tom whispered. I want you to understand that instinct kills, that emotional responses lead to wrong choices, that forest rangers are given power over life and death without any real preparation for wielding it properly. You're insane. I'm thorough. My name is David Reeves, Ranger David Reeves, retired. 23 years of service in these mountains before the Cascade River incident destroyed my faith in our training, our methods, our worthiness. Tom's 6th and final ability, spatial memory, suddenly activated with crystal clarity. He remembered every detail of the Cascade River incident, including the backup ranger who'd been called in to assist. David Reeves, the older ranger who'd argued for saving the research team, who'd been overruled by Tom's field command decision. You were there, Tom said. I was there. I watched you choose emotion over logic, family over the greater good. I watched good people die because you couldn't think past your parental instincts. I made the best decision I could with the information I had. Did you? Or did you make the easiest emotional choice and rationalize it afterward? Tom felt sick. The weight of 8 years' worth of guilt settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. Jennifer Walsh is alive, Reeves continued. For now. She's in a situation that requires immediate rescue. But here's your test, Thomas. There are 2 locations. In one location, Jennifer is trapped but relatively safe. She has food, water, shelter. She could survive for days. In the other location is a family of 4, parents and 2 young children, who became lost yesterday during a day hike. They have no survival gear, no shelter, no food. They'll die of exposure by nightfall. Tom's hands clenched into fists. "You're lying. The Mitchell family from Port Angeles. Father Robert, 38, Mother Sarah, 35, daughters Emma, 6, and Sophie, 4. They started a day hike on the Hurricane Ridge Trail yesterday morning and took a wrong turn. They've been wandering in circles for 26 hours. The children are hypothermic." "Prove it." The radio crackled and Tom heard a man's voice, weak and desperate. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please, my daughters are so cold. We can't find the trail. Please, if anyone can hear this." Tom's blood ran cold. The voice sounded genuine, exhausted, terrified, on the edge of panic. "You have 30 minutes to choose," Reeves said. "Jennifer Walsh is at coordinates 47.978 north, 123.642 west. The Mitchell family is at 47.985 north, 123.638 west. Both locations are approximately 40 minutes from your current position. You cannot reach both in time." Tom pulled out his backup GPS unit, which suddenly showed full signal. The coordinates appeared on the screen as waypoints. Both locations were real, both were accessible, both were almost exactly 40 minutes away through difficult terrain. Choose wisely, Ranger Bennett, and remember, instinct failed you before. Logic might save lives this time. The radio went dead. Tom stared at the GPS coordinates, his mind racing. Everything about this felt wrong, but the voice of the father pleading for help sounded completely genuine. And if Reeves was telling the truth about Jennifer's relative safety versus the family's immediate danger. But something nagged at Tom's investigative intuition. Something about the precision of the setup, the theatrical presentation, the way Reeves had anticipated every element of Tom's response. Tom closed his eyes and let his spatial memory work. 8 years ago at Cascade River, what had been the key detail that he'd missed? What had Reeves seen that Tom hadn't? And then he remembered. The research team's radio had been broadcasting for help, but the signal was weak, distorted. Tom had assumed they were in immediate danger because of the panic in their voices. But Reeves had argued that the Patterson's situation was more urgent because their location was unstable. The rock slide was still active. The area could collapse at any moment. Reeves had been right about the immediate danger assessment. But Tom had overruled him because the Pattersons had a child, because the mother was screaming, because his emotional response overrode tactical analysis. Now, 8 years later, Reeves was testing whether Tom had learned from that mistake. Tom opened his eyes and studied the coordinates again. Jennifer's location was in a known cave system near Bogachiel Peak, dangerous to access but stable once you reached it. The Mitchell family's supposed location was in an area prone to landslides, especially after recent rain. If Reeves was recreating the Cascade River scenario, then the obvious emotional choice, save the family with children, was probably the wrong tactical decision. But what if Tom was overthinking it? What if Reeves expected him to second-guess his instincts and was counting on that psychological manipulation? Tom had 15 minutes to decide. He thought about Jennifer Walsh, experienced hiker, properly equipped, probably capable of surviving in a cave system for several days if necessary. Then he thought about 2 small children dying of exposure while he hesitated. His radio crackled one more time. Not Reeves's voice, but a woman's voice, weak but determined. "If anyone can hear this, my name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm trapped in a cave system, but I'm okay. I have food and water. I can hear someone nearby. He's been talking on a radio for hours. I think this is all fake. The family, I don't think they're real. Please, don't make the same mistake he keeps talking about. Don't let emotion override logic." The radio went dead permanently. Tom stared at the coordinates for another moment, then made his choice. He started hiking toward Jennifer's location. The route to the cave system was treacherous, loose rock, steep drop-offs, terrain that would challenge even an experienced mountaineer. but Tom's natural orientation guided him through the maze of ridges and valleys. As he climbed, he began to understand Reeves' psychology. 8 years of guilt and obsession had driven the older ranger to create elaborate scenarios to test whether Forest Service personnel could make logical decisions under pressure. The Mitchell family was probably fictional. Recorded voices, maybe actors, designed to trigger the same emotional response that had doomed the research team at Cascade River. But Jennifer Walsh was real, and she was in genuine danger. Tom reached the cave entrance at 4:15 p.m., just as the October sky began to darken toward evening. The caves were part of a limestone system that honeycombed the mountain, easy to get lost in, impossible to navigate without proper equipment. "Jennifer!" Tom called into the cave mouth. "Here! I'm here!" Tom followed her voice deeper into the cave system, using his headlamp to navigate narrow passages and steep drops. He found Jennifer Walsh in a side chamber, unharmed, but trapped by a deliberately triggered rockfall that blocked the main passage. "He's been here for hours," Jennifer said, as Tom began moving rocks to clear the passage. "Setting up equipment, testing his radio, practicing his voices. He's completely insane." "Did you see him clearly?" "Older man, maybe 60, military bearing. He kept talking about teaching lessons and testing worthiness." Jennifer paused. "He said you'd make the wrong choice, said you'd go after the family and leave me to die." "He was wrong." Tom cleared enough rocks to create a passage, and within 20 minutes they were outside the cave system. But as they started down the mountain, Tom's radio crackled back to life. "Congratulations, Ranger Bennett," Reeves's voice said. "You've learned from your mistakes, logic over emotion, the greater good over instinctive response." "Where are you, Reeves?" "Close enough to observe, far enough to escape if necessary." A pause. "You realize, of course, that this changes nothing. One correct decision doesn't erase 8 years of failure." "The research team's death wasn't my fault, wasn't it? You had better access to the Patterson family, yes. But you also had backup rangers 30 minutes behind you. You could have reached the research team first, established their situation, then redirected help to the Pattersons. Instead, you made an emotional choice, and 4 promising young people died." Tom stopped walking. In the growing darkness, he could barely make out the tree line, but he felt Reeves watching from somewhere in the shadows. "You want to know the truth about the Cascade River incident?" Tom called out. "I remember everything now. The research team wasn't in immediate danger when I made the choice. They had climbing gear, experience, time to wait for rescue. The Pattersons were trapped by an active rock slide that could have killed them in minutes." "You're rationalizing." "The backup rangers found Marcus Chen's body downstream from where the research team was supposed to be. He'd left the group to try to reach help. He drowned because he made an individual choice to abandon his team, not because I chose to save a family." Silence from the radio. "You've spent 8 years blaming me for a decision that Marcus Chen made on his own," Tom continued. "You've created this entire psychological test based on a false premise. That's not..." Reeves's voice had lost its confident tone. "You need help, Reeves. Professional help. This has to stop." The radio went dead, but Tom's human presence detection ability told him that Reeves was still nearby, still watching. For a moment, Tom considered pursuing the older ranger, but Jennifer needed medical attention, and the weather was deteriorating rapidly. As Tom and Jennifer reached the trailhead at 6:30 p.m., Tom's radio crackled one final time. 8 years, Bennett. 8 years of guilt and anger and obsession. Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been fighting the wrong enemy. David, let me help you. This doesn't have to end badly. It already ended badly, 8 years ago. Everything since then has just been aftermath." The radio went silent permanently. 2 days later, park rangers found David Reeves' body at the bottom of a cliff near Mount Storm King. His death was ruled accidental, but Tom suspected otherwise. The older ranger had carried 8 years of misplaced guilt and had finally run out of ways to justify his obsession. Standing at Reeves's funeral, Tom realized that the real lesson of the past 2 days wasn't about choosing logic over emotion or making perfect decisions under pressure. It was about learning to live with the weight of impossible choices and finding a way to move forward without letting guilt destroy everything you touch. Tom returned to his contractor work with Park Services, but something had changed. He still carried the weight of responsibility for life and death decisions, but he no longer carried the crushing burden of believing that every choice had to be perfect. Sometimes good people died despite everyone's best efforts. Sometimes the right choice still led to tragedy. Sometimes survival was just a matter of making the best decision you could with the information you had and accepting the consequences. The forest was still dangerous, still unforgiving, still capable of creating impossible scenarios where every choice carried a price. But Tom had learned something that David Reeves never could, that the real test of a ranger wasn't making perfect decisions, but learning to live with imperfect ones and continuing to serve despite the weight of past mistakes. In the end, that might be the only wisdom these mountains had to offer. Marcus Webb's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., same as every morning for the past 3 years. Old habits die hard, especially when they kept you alive for over a decade in these mountains. He rolled out of bed, feet finding the cold hardwood floor of his cabin outside West Glacier. October mornings in Montana didn't mess around. Coffee first, always coffee first. While the ancient percolator gurgled to life, Marcus pulled on his thermal base layer, then wool socks, then the same Carhartt pants he'd worn through 5 seasons as a ranger. The routine was meditation, each action deliberate, practiced, necessary. His reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a man who looked older than his 38 years. Weathered skin, grey creeping into brown hair, eyes that had seen too much of what people did to each other in isolated places. 3 years since he'd turned in his badge, but the mountains still called him back. The phone call had come yesterday evening. Sarah Chen, a 24-year-old grad student from UC Berkeley, missing for 3 days in the Highline Trail area. Local SAR teams had found nothing. Her parents had money, influence, and desperation, a combination that bought them Marcus Webb's expertise. He loaded his pack with practiced efficiency. First aid kit, emergency bivvy, headlamp, backup headlamp, GPS unit that worked when satellites felt cooperative, paper maps in waterproof case, emergency radio, 3 days worth of high-calorie food, water purification tablets, then the tools that set him apart. Tracking stick, magnifying glass, evidence bags, camera with macro lens, notebook wrapped in plastic. The Highline Trail parking area sat empty at 6:45 a.m., morning mist rising from McDonald Creek like ghosts. Marcus parked his Jeep next to the trailhead sign and stepped out into air so cold it burned his lungs. Perfect tracking weather, moisture in the air, preserved scent trails, soft ground held impressions. He studied the information packet SAR had given him. Sarah Chen, 5'4", 125 pounds, experienced hiker, last seen 3 days ago, starting the Highline Trail alone. Her blue Honda Civic had been found here, keys still in the ignition, wallet and phone left behind intentionally. She'd posted on social media about disconnecting from the digital world. Marcus started where every good tracker starts, with the last known position. He circled Sarah's car methodically, eyes scanning the ground. Standard hiking boots, size 7. The tread pattern stamped itself into his memory. 5-pointed star in the heel, diamond pattern across the toe. The first quarter-mile of trail told a simple story. Sarah's prints were clear in the mud, steady gait, no signs of distress. She'd stopped once to retie her left boot. The laces had left faint impressions where they'd touched the ground. A careful hiker, which made her disappearance more troubling. At the half-mile marker, Marcus found the first anomaly. Sarah's footprints continued straight on the main trail, but another set of prints appeared from the tree line. Size 11 boots, aggressive lug sole, deeper impression on the right side. Whoever wore them favored their left leg slightly. The prints paralleled Sarah's for exactly 50 yards, staying 20 feet off the trail, then disappeared back into the forest. Marcus knelt beside the clearest impression. The boot print was fresh, no more than 3 days old, same time frame as Sarah's disappearance. But something felt wrong. The stride was too perfect, the spacing too measured, like someone walking very deliberately. He followed Sarah's trail deeper into the wilderness. The Highline Trail was notorious for its exposure, a narrow ledge carved into the Continental Divide with 1,000-foot drops on one side. But the prints led steadily upward, no sign of hesitation or fear. 2 miles in, Marcus found the second anomaly. A branch hung broken at exactly eye level, Sarah's eye level. The break was clean, recent, but wrong. No hiker breaks a branch that way, and wind doesn't snap wood with that kind of precision. Someone had broken it deliberately. Marcus activated his first real ability, the one that had made him legendary among his fellow rangers. His exceptional tracking went beyond following footprints. He could read the story written in bent grass, disturbed soil, microscopic fibers caught on bark. Most people saw a forest. Marcus saw a library. Beneath the broken branch, he found a single thread of blue nylon, Sarah's jacket color according to the missing person report. But the thread wasn't torn. It was cut. Clean edges under his magnifying glass revealed a blade sharp enough to slice fabric without pulling. The trail told him someone had intercepted Sarah here, someone who knew she was coming. Marcus studied the scene with growing unease. The broken branch was exactly the right height to catch someone's attention. The blue thread was positioned where any competent tracker would find it. It felt like someone was leaving breadcrumbs. His second ability kicked in automatically, reading nature's moods and warnings. 15 years in these mountains had taught him to listen to the forest's voice. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter. Even the wind seemed muted. Animals knew when predators were near. Marcus photographed everything, bagged the thread, and marked the GPS coordinates. The logical next step was to call for backup, report the evidence, let law enforcement take over. But something in his gut said there wasn't time for bureaucracy. Sarah's trail continued beyond the broken branch, but the stride pattern had changed. The prints were deeper, more erratic. Fear or exhaustion, Marcus had seen both signatures countless times. But mixed in with Sarah's increasingly frantic footprints, he found something that made his blood freeze. The size 11 boots were back, not following Sarah's trail this time, leading it. 3 miles from the trailhead, Marcus found the third anomaly. Sarah's backpack hung from a tree branch 8 feet off the ground, too high for her to have reached, too precise to have been thrown. Someone had climbed up and placed it there deliberately. Inside the pack, water bottles still full, food untouched, first aid kit unused, but her journal was missing, along with any identification. Marcus's radio crackled with static as he tried to report the find. Dead air. He checked the battery, full charge. The radio was being jammed. His third ability hummed to life like electricity under his skin, the supernatural awareness of human presence that had saved his life more times than he could count. Someone was watching him, close. The feeling was familiar from his ranger days, that prickle of hostile attention. But this felt different, calculating, patient, professional. Marcus continued up the trail, every sense on high alert. The afternoon sun created a cathedral of light through the aspens, their golden leaves rustling with secrets. Under normal circumstances, this would be one of the most beautiful hikes in Montana. Nothing about this felt normal. 4 miles in, he found the fourth anomaly. A small cairn of stones that hadn't been there 3 days ago. SAR teams had photographed this section of trail thoroughly, but someone had built this marker recently, and with purpose. Beneath the top stone, Marcus found a folded piece of paper. "Mr. Webb," it read in precise handwriting, "I was hoping you'd be the one they called. Your reputation precedes you. Let's play a game worthy of our respective talents. Follow the trail I've left, if you're clever enough to see it. Sarah is alive for now. Whether she stays that way depends on how well you understand the rules." A fellow student of human nature, Marcus read the note twice, memorizing every word. Someone had been expecting him specifically. Someone who knew his name, his reputation, his methods, someone who had been planning this. His fourth ability engaged automatically, investigative intuition that let him see patterns others missed. The broken branch at eye level, the perfectly positioned thread. The backpack hung just high enough to require effort to retrieve. The jammed radio at the exact moment he'd found evidence. This wasn't a random abduction. This was an elaborate game, and he was the intended second player. The trail beyond the cairn split into 3 directions. Official park maps showed only the main route continuing north toward the Continental Divide. But Marcus could see faint bootprints heading west into unmarked wilderness and disturbed vegetation, suggesting a third path east toward the deeper backcountry. A test. Choose the wrong path, and Sarah dies. Marcus knelt beside each potential route, studying the ground with the intensity of a diamond cutter examining a stone. The westward path showed clear sign of recent passage. Bent grass, scuffed soil, the unmistakable depression pattern of size 11 boots. Too obvious. The eastward path showed subtle disturbance, the kind most trackers would miss. Grass pressed down with something heavier than wind, but lighter than footsteps. Someone had covered their tracks expertly, almost expertly enough. The main trail showed no recent sign at all. Marcus's intuition whispered warnings. The westward path was a decoy meant to lead him away from Sarah. The eastward path was the real trail, but probably booby-trapped in some way. And the main trail was what his opponent expected him to avoid. Marcus chose the main trail. 200 yards later, he found validation of his choice. A single drop of blood on a granite boulder, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Sarah's blood, he was certain. DNA testing would confirm it later, but his instincts were screaming the truth. Someone had brought her this way, bleeding. The blood trail led him up a steep series of switchbacks toward an area of the park he knew well, a maze of granite outcroppings and hidden valleys that park maps marked as extremely hazardous terrain. Perfect place to hide someone, perfect place for an ambush. As evening shadows began reaching across the trail, Marcus felt his fifth ability activating, natural orientation that worked regardless of equipment or conditions. Even without GPS, even without a compass, even in complete darkness, he could navigate these mountains by some internal compass that had never failed him. Tonight, that ability might be the only thing keeping him alive. 6 miles from the trailhead, Marcus found the 5th anomaly. Sarah's hiking boots placed side by side on a flat rock like an offering. Laces removed, socks still inside, warm to the touch. She was close, and still alive. The boots were positioned to point toward a narrow slot canyon that cut deep into the mountainside. Marcus had explored this area years ago during a rescue training exercise. The canyon was a dead end, walls too steep to climb, only one way in or out. A perfect trap, but also the only way to reach Sarah. Marcus checked his watch. 4:30 p.m. Sunset in 30 minutes, full darkness by 6. His opponent had timed this perfectly. Come in daylight and risk being seen from above. Wait for darkness and lose the ability to track effectively, unless you were Marcus Webb and darkness was just another tool. He entered the slot canyon with every sense screaming danger. The walls rose 40 feet on either side, so narrow in places he had to turn sideways to pass through. perfect killing ground for anyone with high ground advantage. 50 yards in, Marcus heard the voice. "Mr. Webb." The words echoed off stone walls, impossible to locate. Cultured accent, educated speech patterns, calm as a professor, lecturing to graduate students. "I'm impressed. You chose the path that required actual thinking rather than simple tracking skills. Most investigators would have followed the obvious trail west and found nothing but disappointment." Marcus stopped walking but didn't respond. Let his opponent talk. People revealed themselves when they thought they had control. Sarah is alive and unharmed, currently secured in a location where your exceptional abilities will be put to their ultimate test. But first, we need to establish the parameters of our game. A spotlight suddenly blazed from high above, pinning Marcus in harsh white light. He couldn't see the source, but knew he was perfectly visible to whoever was speaking. "I know who you are, Marcus Webb. 5 years as a park ranger, 7 major rescues, 3 commendations for tracking skills that bordered on supernatural. You found that lost family in Yellowstone when everyone else had given up. You tracked down the Glacier Grizzly Killer when the FBI couldn't. You have what I call the gift, abilities that transcend normal human perception." The voice paused, letting silence stretch between them. "I have the gift too, Mr. Webb, but my specialty is understanding what makes people break and how to rebuild them afterward." Marcus felt pieces clicking together in his mind. "You're a psychologist." Was Dr. Richard Kellerman, formerly of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. I specialized in crisis negotiation and hostage psychology. Kept detailed files on people like you, individuals with exceptional tracking and survival abilities. You were in my database long before Sarah Chen disappeared." The spotlight shifted, creating dancing shadows on the canyon walls. 5 years ago, my wife and daughter went missing during a hiking trip in Olympic National Forest. The local ranger who led the search was incompetent, overconfident, ignored obvious evidence. By the time competent trackers were called in, it was too late. I found their bodies myself 3 weeks later. Marcus heard genuine pain in the voice now, carefully controlled but unmistakable. "That experience taught me something profound about human nature, Mr. Webb. Most people are fundamentally inadequate when tested by real crisis. They panic, they make poor decisions, they fail when failure means death. But a select few, people like you, possess abilities that transcend normal human limitations." "So you decided to test people," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. "See who measures up to your standards." "Exactly. Sarah Chen was never the real target. She was bait, carefully selected to draw someone with your specific skill set. I've been studying you for months, Mr. Webb. Your methods, your successes, your psychological profile. You represent something rare in humanity, genuine competence in life or death situations." The spotlight dimmed slightly, no longer blinding. "This canyon has 13 different routes to its deepest section. 12 of them lead to dead ends, where Sarah will slowly suffocate as oxygen runs out. One leads to her location, where you can free her safely. You have 90 minutes before the air runs out completely." Marcus felt cold calculations settling over him like a familiar coat. "And what do you get out of this?" "The satisfaction of watching a master at work, and proof that there are still people worthy of survival in this world of incompetence." Dr. Kellerman's voice carried a note of genuine respect. "I've killed 11 people in similar scenarios over the past 3 years, Mr. Webb. None of them measured up. All of them failed basic tests of competence and awareness. But you chose the correct path into this canyon. You recognize the subtle signs others missed. You interest me." "Let Sarah go," Marcus said. "Test me directly if that's what you want. But that would remove the stakes that make this meaningful. Without consequence for failure, without someone's life depending on your choices, how can I truly measure your abilities?" Marcus started moving deeper into the canyon, studying the walls for potential routes. His sixth and final ability was starting to activate, spatial memory that could recall exact details of locations he'd visited years before. And he had been in this canyon before, during that training exercise. "I remember you now," Dr. Kellerman's voice followed him. "The exercise, 4 years ago, you found the practice victim in record time using routes that weren't on any map. You have a supernatural sense of geography, don't you? Like an internal GPS that works on intuition rather than satellites." Marcus said nothing, but his memory was pulling up details from that long-ago training day. 13 routes, just like Kellerman had said. But there had been a 14th route, one so dangerous the training instructors had declared it off-limits. "You're remembering," Kellerman said with satisfaction. "I can see it in your body language. But remember, Mr. Webb, that training exercise was conducted in summer, with safety equipment and rescue teams standing by. Tonight, you're alone, in darkness, with no backup coming." Marcus reached the first junction point. 3 passages branched off from the main canyon. His memory served up a detailed map of the entire system, routes marked in his mind like lines on paper. The leftmost passage led to a chamber where the training instructors had hidden practice victims. But it also connected to 2 other routes that dead-ended in areas where carbon dioxide would accumulate. The middle passage was the safest route, but led to a section of canyon that had been sealed off after a rockfall 4 years ago. The rightmost passage was treacherous, requiring technical climbing skills, but connected to the deepest part of the canyon system. "Choose carefully," Kellerman's voice echoed. "Sarah's life depends on your decision." Marcus chose the rightmost passage. 30 minutes later, he emerged into a circular chamber 40 feet across, walls rising straight up into darkness. In the center of the chamber, a metal cage barely large enough for 1 person. Inside the cage, Sarah Chen. She was alive, conscious, and terrified. Duct tape covered her mouth, but her eyes tracked Marcus's movement with desperate hope. "Impressive, Doctor." Kellerman's voice came from somewhere above. "You navigated the most dangerous route without hesitation, but I'm afraid the test isn't over." A spotlight illuminated the chamber, revealing Sarah's predicament in harsh detail. The cage was suspended 15 feet above a pit filled with sharpened wooden stakes. A thin rope held it in place, already fraying under the weight. "The rope will part in approximately 20 minutes, Kellerman explained. "You have 3 ways to reach her. 1 will succeed, 2 will kill you both." Marcus studied the chamber with growing understanding. This wasn't just a test of his abilities, it was an elaborate suicide machine designed by someone with both psychological training and engineering skills. "The straight climb up to the cage requires equipment you don't have," Kellerman continued. "The walls are too smooth, handholds too few. You'd fall before reaching her. The pit can be crossed using the wooden beams I've provided, but they're balanced on fulcrums. Step wrong, and they'll tip, sending you into the stakes. Or you can use the chain system I've installed along the far wall. But it's designed to support only 180 pounds maximum. Add Sarah's weight, and it will fail." Marcus circled the chamber slowly, his spatial memory overlaying the current scene with recollections from the training exercise. The chamber looked different now. Kellerman had modified it extensively, but underneath the additions, Marcus could see the original geography. "You're wondering about the 4th option," Kellerman said. "The one that wasn't included in my list." Marcus had found it. A narrow crack in the western wall, partially concealed by Kellerman's modifications. During the training exercise, it had led to a shaft that connected to the surface. Too narrow for most adults, but someone Sarah's size might fit through. "That crack leads to a 90-foot vertical shaft," Kellerman said, reading Marcus's thoughts. "Impossible to climb without technical gear. And even if you could somehow get Sarah up there, it opens onto a cliff face with no safe way down." Marcus knelt beside the crack, studying its dimensions. not quite wide enough for his shoulders, but Sarah could fit. The question was whether she had the strength and coordination to make a free climb in total darkness. 15 minutes until the rope fails, Kellerman announced. What's your choice, Mr. Webb? Instead of answering, Marcus did something unexpected. He sat down cross-legged in the middle of the chamber and closed his eyes. Giving up already? Kellerman's voice carried a note of disappointment. I expected more from someone with your reputation. Marcus wasn't giving up. He was activating his abilities in sequence, like a pianist running scales before a performance. Exceptional tracking to read every detail of the chamber's construction. Nature reading to understand the mechanical systems Kellerman had installed. Human presence detection to pinpoint Kellerman's exact location. Investigative intuition to see the pattern behind the apparent choices. Natural orientation to map every possible route, and spatial memory to overlay everything with his knowledge of the chamber's original structure. 10 minutes until rope failure. Marcus opened his eyes and smiled. You made a mistake, Dr. Kellerman. Enlighten me. You assumed I'd try to save Sarah using one of the routes you provided, but you forgot something important about people with my abilities. We don't just work with what we're given, we change the game entirely. Marcus stood and walked to the wooden beams spanning the pit, not to cross them, to dismantle them. Those beams are bolted in place, Kellerman said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. The bolts are designed to fail under weight, not torque, Marcus replied, wrenching the first beam free with a leverage technique he'd learned during technical rescue training. You engineered them to tip when walked on, but not when twisted from the side. 5 minutes until rope failure. Using the freed beam as a lever, Marcus began prying at the base of the cage's support pole, not trying to stop the rope from breaking, trying to redirect where the cage would fall. That won't work, Kellerman said, but his voice lacked conviction. The physics are against you. The physics assume I'm trying to prevent the fall, Marcus said, sweat running down his face as he strained against the lever. I'm not preventing it, I'm controlling it. 2 minutes until rope failure. Marcus had repositioned the cage's fall trajectory by exactly 40 degrees. When the rope snapped, instead of plummeting straight down into the stakes, the cage would swing toward the eastern wall, toward the narrow crack that led to the surface shaft. Even if you succeed, Kellerman said desperately, Sarah can't make that climb. It's 90 feet straight up, no handholds, total darkness. She doesn't have to climb, Marcus said. She just has to hang on. 1 minute until rope failure. Marcus pulled out his emergency radio and activated its emergency beacon function. Not for communication, the signal was still jammed, but the beacon created a powerful localized electromagnetic pulse that would disable any electronic systems within 50 feet, including the device controlling the rope's tension. The rope snapped 30 seconds early. The cage swung exactly as Marcus had calculated, slamming into the eastern wall beside the crack. Marcus was there waiting, having positioned himself using his natural orientation ability to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. He yanked the cage door open, pulled Sarah free, and shoved her into the crack just as the cage rebounded and crashed into the stakes below. Climb, he told her, removing the tape from her mouth. Don't think about how high it is, just climb until you see stars. I can't, Sarah gasped. I'm afraid of heights. I can't see anything. Sarah. Marcus gripped her shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. I tracked you through 6 miles of wilderness using abilities I can't fully explain. I navigated this chamber using memories from 4 years ago. I calculated the exact trajectory needed to get you to this crack. Trust me when I say you can make this climb. Something in his voice convinced her. Sarah disappeared into the crack, her breathing echoing in the narrow space as she began climbing toward the surface. Remarkable, Dr. Kellerman's voice came from above, no longer amplified by speakers. He was speaking naturally now, somewhere close. You solved a puzzle I spent months designing in less than 20 minutes, using methods I never considered. Marcus looked up and saw Kellerman's silhouette against the stars, peering down from the chamber's rim. That was your mistake, Marcus called up to him. You designed a puzzle that could be solved by intelligence and planning, but you forgot about intuition, about abilities that work faster than conscious thought. I wanted to see if you were truly exceptional, Kellerman replied. You've proven that beyond any doubt. I'm genuinely impressed. Impressed enough to let us go? Kellerman was quiet for a long moment. You understand what I've become, don't you, Mr. Webb? What losing my family did to me? I understand grief, Marcus said. I understand anger at incompetence that costs lives. I've felt both, but I also understand that becoming a killer doesn't honor the people we've lost. Perhaps, but I've gone too far to stop now. Too many deaths on my conscience, too many... Kellerman's voice cut off abruptly. Marcus heard scuffling sounds, then silence. Marcus? Sarah's voice called from far above. There's someone up here, a man with a radio. He says he's with the FBI. Backup had arrived after all. The emergency beacon that disabled Kellerman's jamming equipment had also allowed Marcus's earlier radio calls to get through. SR teams and federal agents had been tracking the signal for the past hour. Dr. Richard Kellerman was taken into custody without resistance. During questioning, he provided detailed information about 11 previous victims, allowing their families closure and their bodies proper burial. He was diagnosed with severe PTSD and complicated grief disorder, mitigating factors that likely saved him from the death penalty. Marcus's report to the FBI filled 43 pages and led to significant changes in how missing person cases were investigated in wilderness areas. His exceptional abilities, previously the subject of Ranger Station folklore, were now officially documented and studied. But the real lesson came 3 months later when Marcus received a letter from Sarah Chen. Mr. Webb, she wrote, I wanted you to know that I've changed my graduate thesis topic. Instead of studying ecological preservation, I'm focusing on search and rescue techniques and the psychological factors that make some people exceptionally capable in crisis situations. Dr. Kellerman was wrong about most people being inadequate. He just never learned to identify and develop the abilities that exist in all of us. You saved my life, not just through exceptional skills, but by believing I could climb that shaft when I didn't believe it myself. That moment taught me something important. Competence isn't just about individual ability. It's about recognizing potential in others and giving them the confidence to exceed their own limitations. I'm starting search and rescue training next month. If you ever need someone to watch your back in the wilderness, you know where to find me. Marcus smiled as he folded the letter. Dr. Kellerman had been wrong about human nature. Most people weren't inadequate. They just needed someone to show them what they were capable of. The morning sun was rising over the mountains outside his cabin window, same as every day. But Marcus no longer saw each dawn as just another routine to follow. He saw it as another chance to help people discover what they could become. The forest was calling again. This time Marcus answered with hope instead of duty.